as usual, and we're going to jump straight to the questions of the day. In case you're asking yourself who our guests are, we've already told you that one of them is David Maina, who's an expert in business at ABSA. We would like to just jump straight into the conversation. There's so many questions on, first of all, is it a threat? Is there an opportunity for this? And the effects of El Nino. I think I'll just start with the expert, that is David Maina. Just talk to us about our one. Is there an opportunity, or is it just purely a threat, El Nino?
Thank you very much, Brian. I think I explained already about where we are coming from and what kind of sector we have, and that also points to why we are vulnerable. Before I dive into El Nino, which is a phenomenon that has been forecasted by most of the weather experts, I'd like to say that what makes a problem a disaster is because of the preparedness of the recipient of that disaster. Well, how are they before it came?
Yeah.
If I give an example from the medicine field, which I'm not an expert in, if you remember during COVID, there was a lot of warning that if you have underlying condition, you are more exposed and it's likely to be fatal for you if you have underlying condition. Not because the other people are safer, but the underlying condition was actually one of the things that brought you very close to having more serious impact on yourself if you are hit by the virus. Now, in the same way, if the sector is already having underlying conditions, then El Nino becomes a problem. And any other disaster, because of how we are set already, our default settings is not very good. Now, if you look at our feed sector right now, we are talking about a region where feed, when we talk about food security, we focus on humans, and you don't see a lot of linkage to the animal feed and how animal resources feed people. A good example, the USA, 60% of their grain goes to feed. Here, most of our countries in the region, is that we provide to the animals the residual elements of food from the human food chain. So it is not a very well-defined feed system. So here in Kenya, for example, which is one of the countries in the region, and which is respected for some value chains like dairy, you will find that we are deficient already. In one of the conferences, I listened to the government indicating that we are 60% deficient of feed. That means for every 10 cows or 10 units of cattle that we have, we are able to feed 4 out of 10.
Wow.
If input, just imagine this, because sometimes these examples are better understood if you're thinking about human.
Yeah.
Mariam, you have 10 children to feed.
I can only feed 4.
And you have to share with them the portion of 4. So what that means, if all of them have to bite something, it means that you're feeding them 40%. That means that they can't achieve their growth targets.
Yeah.
If it's about milk, they're going to provide only up to 40%, maybe less, because they also need to maintain their bodies. And if it's about meat, then the growth speed, the fattening, can only be achieved up to a certain extent. Then if you look at that deficiency, it means that we, even before any disaster hits, whether it's drought, and is not necessarily a disaster, but if it has a disaster side of it, it means that we're already in a very bad place. Now, the other thing is that when we declare emergencies, the system of declaring an emergency is based on the condition of the animals and not on the feed available in the sector. So that means that we declare emergency too late. Now, again, think about this. Do you realize that you're in a problem when you have no food in the house or when your kids begin to stunt? At what point do you think you're now in an emergency? People actually get scared if they have no feed, if they have no food for the next meal.
Yeah.
No, they don't wait for kids to begin to become thin and to lose fat. Then they start saying, hey, I think we're in an emergency. It's about the next meal. In the same way, we should look at feed from the same kind of eyes. We don't wait for the animal to lose weight, to begin showing the rib bones and the other bones. Then we say, I think we're in emergency. At that point, there's no action that could easily preempt the disaster that is coming. It's too late. So that's actually a major problem. So with that deficit, we are already in an emergency. And I think that is what compounds the situation. So if I go to El Nino, people see it, there's a good light on it. In fact, I heard you say that the first El Nino was 1997. We were sitting for final exams in Form 4, KCSE. I hope I don't sound homo habilis to you guys. Because you guys are,
No, no, no.
Karibu, you sound like them.
A
but,
little bit.
it's close to that because I think you guys were still in pre-unit. But yes, when you look at it in areas which are not prone to floods,
Yeah.
people are excited. It's a bumper harvest. You know, you can now plant a short season and get something nice. No watering for guys who use irrigation. So it's exciting, really. Of course, there are nightmares of environmental issues in the urban areas, drainage and so on.
Yes.
But then there are things that are less spoken about. Because who thinks that when it rains, you can no longer harvest grass? Ever heard about you make hay when sun shines?
Yes.
That's exactly that.
Yes.
When the sun stops shining, you can't make hay. And that's what you're talking about here. And then we see, what will that imply? Where will that bring us to? And how do we preempt that? How do we mitigate so that doesn't happen?
Yeah.
And for this session, we now look at what business solution do we have to be able to bridge that gap. So it doesn't happen, and if it has to happen now, we have to really contribute to reduce the impact.
Yeah, we're
of it.
prepared for it. I'll throw then the next question directly to Simon, because how do we preempt, these things, and how do we mitigate for them, especially from a business perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Mariam, and thank you, David, for that insight. I always learn a lot when I sit with David because he's got a lot of knowledge, especially when it comes to fodder and livestock value chain. So this reminds me of a proverb I like mentioning. I think it's from West Africa.
Yes.
When a chameleon wants to escape a burning bush, it must forget the walking style of its ancestors.
Time to
It's
To
time
run,
to,
yeah.
to really
Yeah.
run. And I think the reality is that what David has positioned is that there's going to be disruption in the supply chain, right? And I mentioned the value chain, how it is organized. I talked about the old age agricultural economics problem,
yes.
demand and supply. And that's a big challenge. So what that tends to happen, especially now looking at businesses, it disrupts their margins, and disrupted margins show on the bottom line, right? And that's how, as financiers, we come in to see how can we work together, collaborate. So for an established entrepreneur, he could be in the input side, he could be the actual producer, he could be actually the aggregator or the processor. They'll all get affected
Yes.
because one part of the value chain is affected, which is the inputs, right? Which is what David has said. So as APSA and as financiers, what we can do is actually work together and say, how can we provide some, temporary accommodation, trade and working capital solution that enables you stock up, for example, because that's a natural reaction, right? You want to stock up in anticipation of a period where there'll be
deficit.
no fodder.
You want to make hay while the sun shines, literally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the fact that because you know how the flow of the commodity goes, and the money doesn't come in at the same speed, right? So that's how a financier comes in and says, you're an established player, you've been in this value chain for, say, 3 years, 2 out of 3 years, you're profitable.
Yeah.
So you've got a good business case, right? Let's see how we can support you, during this period, provide the working capital requirement to stock up on the fodder side.
Yeah.
And those are solutions that are available across financial institutions. You can walk into any APSA branch and we'll be able to solution you for that. The other aspect is very interesting because it talks about the risk that comes about because of the disruption, too much rain, and remember, these are live animals, right?
Yes.
And across the value chains. So there's an insurable aspect on it. And I think banks are now doing bank assurance. We have a bank assurance team that will enable you, connect you with service providers that will look at what are the inherent risks that are coming about through a Nino, and how can we help you mitigate that risk from happening? Because remember, at the end of the day, what you want to protect is the cow. The cow is, or rather the production unit, let's put it that way,
Yes.
because that's where the money will come from.
Yeah.
So those are some of the two areas that we can quickly think about. Of course, there's investment in, I mentioned water harvesting
Yes.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Asset-based financing around various, mechanization aspects that you may need to enable you, be efficient,
Yes.
especially when now you're faced with this challenge.
Okay. We'll get back into it just a little in just a few minutes. We want to have a look at the traffic and see if the roads are looking clear after a little Sean Paul, and we'll come back and you can give us a few more business solutions outside of the assurance, insurance, of course, asset financing and investing in water harvesting. Here's Ever Blazing by Sean Paul, and we'll take a quick look at the roads.